First speaker of the session is John Symes, who is known, I think, to many of us. He's inaugural director of the Clinical Trials Center in Sydney. He's a medical oncologist, and he inspires us all with his passion about clinical trials. He will talk about strategies for supporting more trials of high value. John.
Thank you, Ben. So the talk I'm going to give is going to build nicely, I think, on the things we've heard already in the previous three sessions. So a lot of my work has been done for me. I'd also like to acknowledge Rachel Morton, who's provided some of the slides and discussion for what I'll cover. So the main points I'd like to make is that if we're going to increase more trials of high value, some of the approaches we can take is firstly to increase the recognition by government and the community at large of the value of clinical trials to change practice and improve outcomes. So we've heard great examples of why trials are of value, but it's really critical that government and the community recognise that as well to underpin the strategies that then we can put in place. So the main theme of that is that the criteria for funding, to look at funding clinical trials, we want criteria that are going to fund those trials which will be a cost-effective use of the healthcare dollar. Also look at the issue of embedding high-quality clinical research in healthcare, using metrics for clinical trials and other clinical research linked to healthcare funding, and also comment on how we can build capacity for high clinical trials through the relevant expertise, both trial networks, coordinating centres, and clinical quality registries. So in terms of increased recognition, clinical trials, as we've heard already, and I'll give you a couple more examples, can be a very cost-effective use of the healthcare dollar compared with many of the treatments we currently support. And to the extent the government and the community at large recognise this, that can be critical to realising some of the strategies which will then see the investment needed to make real improvements. We've seen many examples already, and what I'm going to do is just show you a few more. In the interest of time, I'll probably skip a bit of the details and just go to the highlights of them. So firstly, clinical trials can be a more cost-effective use of the healthcare dollar in terms of they still cost money, but the alternative is spending that on some healthcare treatments is even less cost-effective than those trials. There are also other examples that we've heard about where the trials can be actually cost-saving, where we don't even need to think of the alternative use. It's going to save us dollars overall. So an old example, but an important one, is the lipid trial, which showed that pravastatin in patients with coronary heart disease and average cholesterol levels had improvements in survival and improvements in less heart attack and stroke. And this particular treatment was estimated to cost $6,300 per life year gained when we looked at the main trial results and the extended follow-up. The study also led to changes in the pharmaceutical benefit guidelines and has been a fundamental study in terms of driving changes in global practice, together with many other trials since that time that have also provided substantial evidence on the value of statin therapy. Now, the cost of the lipid trial and follow-up is about $40 million. The cost per additional life year gained with treatment, $6,300 per life year, but we have a treatment that's been used in tens of thousands of patients internationally, probably hundreds of thousands as a result of the evidence. And so if you add the cost of the trial to the cost per of all those patients treated, you still have a treatment with the trial plus treatment introduced of less than $7,000 per quality adjusted life year. So that's one trial, and another thing then is to look at programs, and we saw some great evidence of that presented in the first session this morning of programs within the Australian clinical trial networks. But another example of that from the US was a series of 28 trials costing $335 million, resulting in, and if you introduce the therapies that were introduced, would cost roughly $3.6 billion for an additional 470,000 QALYs. So again, in this particular example, investing in this program was about $7,700 per quality adjusted life year. So relative to alternative uses of the healthcare dollar, a great investment. In terms of studies which have been cost saving, I'll skip the highlights here just to say aspirin for preventing recurrent venous thromboembolic disease, leading to more than a third preventing of future recurrent events, is a treatment which is cost saving because the treatment leads to fewer events which cost more to treat than the treatment itself. So in this particular case, the ASPIRE trial, which was funded from NHMRC, two NHMRC grants, would have paid for itself within 1 to 2 years of the study being completed. In terms of the ideal study, in terms of early versus delayed dialysis for chronic kidney disease, this study showed that there was additional costs for early start of dialysis of about $18,000 per person, and also additional qualities gained for the group started later due to the avoidance of early dialysis. So here we had a treatment that both delayed dialysis, both saved money as well as improved quality of life. And in this particular case, the cost of the trial, $8 million, would be estimated to be, again, have been recouped within a year if about half the patients within Australia took up the intervention. In terms of the Women's Health Initiative study, a huge trial in the US, $260 million, which was done to demonstrate that hopefully hormone replacement therapy would be beneficial in terms of reduced coronary heart disease events, actually surprisingly showed an increase in coronary heart disease events. And when you did all the sums, it was actually the avoidance of the hormone replacement therapy in this setting would lead to 145,000 more QALYs for the cohort treated with a net benefit in dollar terms of $37 billion compared with the cost of the trial of $250 million. So again, whilst it's really expensive, a good return on investment. So we've seen lots of examples, therefore, of clinical trials that can be shown to be of value for money, but my task is more to say, how do we prioritise and select the clinical trials we're going to do in the future of the ones which we should be investing in. Now, the kind of criteria that NHMRC have used for funding trials is to look at scientific quality, significance and or innovation, and whether we have a relevant team quality and capability to undertake the research. And for general research, these are, I think, very worthy criteria for funding studies. But if we're thinking about should we be investing more of the healthcare dollar in clinical trials, we need to think of revising some of these criteria. So we still want to do well-designed trials of high quality. We want them to have a potential impact on future practice and policy, so significance is important, innovation less so. And we want the likelihood of success from the trial in terms of providing important information to change practice to be high, both based on the trial quality as well as the team track record and the feasibility of undertaking the study. Now, these kinds of criteria are the things which expert review, the kind of things that NHMRC does or other panels can do, could still be undertaken. But there's an extra criteria that I think we should be building into this, and that is to more formally assess what the return on investment from these studies will be. What's the expected value of the information? And for this, we need a more formal assessment. So economic assessments can look at, evaluations can look at what the evidence is of cost effectiveness to make reimbursement decisions. There's often a degree of uncertainty about treatment effects in terms of resource use, costs and quality of life. And what evaluative information analysis does is ask what's the maximum that the health system would be willing to pay for that additional information to reduce that uncertainty. So the difference between planning your future trial versus looking at the trials that have already been done is we don't actually know what the results will turn out to be. So we have to consider a range of results, look at prior probabilities of various outcomes, look at decision analytic or health economic models, then to forecast for that range of scenarios what would happen, and then see on the average of those things whether the expected return will be worthwhile. It also includes assumptions about whether the treatment results will actually impact on future practice and what the potential patient population and time horizons are. So there's quite a few challenges in the assumptions here, but if we can make those explicit, that will still help decision makers about whether it's worth investing in such studies. So in terms of other strategies we should think about for funding trials, there is both the investigator-initiated trials of high-value priority areas that we've been talking about. There's how we can choose what are the best questions by engaging with the consumer and practitioners in the relevant areas through such methods as have been used in the Janes-Lind Alliance and so forth. We should consider commission studies where government or funder may also direct the questions that are undertaken, but still apply those same kind of criteria. And we should also think of studies which are funded by both government and industry, where there's benefits for both the health system as well as to industry for various studies. Specific examples would include how we can extend the evidence base that we've heard, where there's quite often a lack of evidence, standard of care or comparative effectiveness studies, and in the area, particularly in cancer, but in others where we have now very expensive therapies which are not necessarily cost effective at the current prices, is there value in the government investing in lesser use of therapies, shorter courses or lower doses, to see whether such a treatment might be cost effective where the full treatment was not. And such studies can actually pay for themselves compared with the alternative of just putting all of that study on the health system. Within the MRFF and the health system then, we should be looking at ways to support capacity building to undertake high quality trials through supporting trial networks and coordinating centres. We should be supporting the use of quality clinical registries, mainly I believe to identify what the important questions are and to provide a platform for more efficient trials, as well as obviously increasing the uptake of the current evidence. But we should also be funding specific clinical trials linked to the healthcare dollar, as I've outlined. And finally, we should be looking at building and quality clinical trial metrics in the health system and link that to funding of healthcare, such as hospital budgets. So some of the metrics, and I won't go through them though, but in addition to participation in trials, there's the number and the quality of trials undertaken, the timeliness and the efficiency of the trials, the quality of it and its impact on practice. And trying to come up with ways of demonstrating that we've established a culture of embedding research, including the amount of protected time for researchers, for clinicians and so on. Finally, if we can have more timely and efficient trials, that will also improve the number of high-value trials undertaken by reduced barriers for timely trials, monitoring and feedback of the metrics not only at a site level but nationally, and also looking at the marginal costs of trials being funded above and beyond the usual care. So in conclusion, let's keep promoting the value proposition of trials and embedding those in the healthcare system and making that argument very clear to government and the general community. Let's build on and maintain the capacity of clinical trial workforce. Let's significantly improve systems for highly efficient trials by reducing barriers, incorporate metrics into funding models, and fund high-quality trials where there's likely to be good expected value of information. Thank you.